Hello. So this recording looks like it covers a number of complicated things, but actually I've already covered fixed and variable costs in the previous recording. We're just picking up on that again, and we're going to cover this idea of law of diminishing return and average and marginal costs. Now, these might take you a moment or two to get your head around, but actually they're not that complex. If you're finding this very difficult, what I'd suggest is you go and do some of the reading around this topic area that I've recommended. So first of all, let's go back to this idea of fixed and variable costs. So fixed costs, and as you'll see from the graph on the right hand side, fixed costs is a straight line because it doesn't change in the short run. Okay, so no matter how much you produce, your fixed costs won't change. So this might be your venue hire example, and no matter how many tickets you sell, your venue hire cost is going to be the same. On the other hand, the variable cost is an upward sloping line. Okay, and then the total costs adds the two of these together, so it adds the variable costs and the fixed costs together, and that gives you the total cost. And so the total cost, it tends to follow this, well, it obviously follows the same pattern as the variable costs because the fixed costs don't change. And the variable cost is very much dependent on productivity, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. So just to pick up some issues here to contextualise this a bit for you. I've got a picture of the Amex Stadium, which is Brighton Hove Albion. So this is a stadium in Brighton. It's near Sussex University where my son's a student. And I've got a question there. What are the cost issues for a football stadium? Because football stadiums are big venues, and I've been to visit this stadium with a group of students before in the past, and we had some very interesting conversation with the venue manager about how they try to utilise their venue, because basically they don't make money out of the venue. The venue runs at a loss because what you have here is a huge venue which is used basically every other week for a football match, but then the rest of the time doesn't have a really obvious purpose. And this is why football clubs do all sorts of things, like they use their space for hospitality, they run a whole range of other kinds of events in there. They even, underneath the stands, they run things like model railway exhibitions, because they're trying to utilise this space and sell this space to people as much as possible to try to increase the revenue stream for the site. So it's actually, can be quite a problem for a venue, because basically you have a huge space which can be redundant a lot of the time, except for when you're hosting big events. So it is quite an interesting challenge in the background for an event company that actually owns venues. So if we go back to productivity, and I want to take you back to this, our variable costs. So we've got a graph on the right there, which shows the variable cost curves, and I want to try to explain why the curve looks like this. So basically, the variable costs will rise as your output rises. So we've got cost up here, and we've got output along the bottom. So as you start producing things, initially it can cost quite a bit. So you might find your costs rise quite sharply when you start selling a small number of tickets, but eventually, the productivity increases. So you see this line begins to level out a bit. So it levels out for a while, but then second, you'll see as productivity begins to decrease, it suddenly starts rising a lot more sharply. So basically the costs go up. So just to repeat that, initially, it costs a bit when you get started, but as you sell more tickets, you can perhaps get a lot of people into your venue without actually rising the costs very much. But eventually those costs begin to rise. And I'll try to explain this a little bit more. So this is what's known as the law of diminishing marginal returns. And you can see the definition there from Sloman and Garrett. So basically, when increasing amounts of a variable factor are used within a given amount of fixed factor, there will come a point when each extra unit of the variable factor will produce less extra output than the previous unit. Now that probably sounds like gobbledygook. Well, let's try to explain it. So you have got a fixed factor, which could be your venue. Okay, so that's a certain size. So that's your fixed factor. In that venue, you might only have one bar. Okay, so that's another fixed factor. Now, as variable factors, you can employ more staff. You might have staff who are on 0 hours contract, and you can get them in when you know you've got a big event happening and a lot of tickets have been sold. But, you know, while you can employ more staff, there's only so much space that those staff can operate in because there's only one bar. So no matter how many more staff you pull in, they can't offer that work that productively because they start getting in the way of one another. So because of the limited fixed factor, i.e. the bar size and the venue size, no matter how many staff you throw at it, you can't serve drinks, say, quickly enough. And therefore the experience begins to diminish, people don't want to come, and you know that you have problems there. But you know, really there's only so many people you can kind of pack in, and therefore you can't accommodate more people coming to that venue. So we can also, moving on from that, we can calculate our average and marginal costs. And these are quite important, deciding how much to produce. So the average cost is, it says there, the unit cost per unit of output. So basically to work out our average costs, we just work out the total cost and divide it by the output. So if we imagine our total cost is £100 and our output is we sell 10 tickets for an event, that would be £100 divided by 10 tickets sold at £10, and that would give us an average cost of 10. And then the marginal cost is the extra cost of producing one more unit. And we work this out, and you'll be getting familiar with this kind of thing. It's the change in total cost divided by the change in output. And we could do that for the data that I had in the table earlier, and we can plot some graphs that look like this. And they're always U-shaped, and it's to do with this law of productivity. So for instance, if we look at the average costs, they initially will go down, but eventually they will start to rise. Because, as I say, you know, no matter how many staff you throw at the bar, you can't sell any more tickets, can't pack more people in. The marginal cost curve, it's dependent on the slope of the variable cost. It's not actually related to the fixed costs at all. So the marginal cost is always related to the variable costs. Now, what's really interesting here, well, it's not interesting probably at all, but critical here, is that the marginal cost curve always cuts the average cost curve at the bottom of the average cost curve. So you can see this point where they cross over. And that's important because that's when businesses operate at the most cost efficient. So here I reckon that's at an output of around about 110. So if you imagine that output was ticket sales, so maybe when you sell 110 tickets and the cost is, I don't know, about £3.50 a ticket, you know, and that's where it's operating at the most efficient. And that's something that you will see in a workbook activity, and we will come back to it there.